everybody, to our webinar focused around cost management with Azure Virtual Desktop utilizing Nerdio. So just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started here. There will be a chat available for any questions you guys want to enter in while we're discussing this topic. We'll have moderators there to answer questions and bring them up to the presenters as we go. With that, let's go ahead and get started. So a couple things to cover today. We really want to focus around Azure Virtual Desktop as a whole, and then what Nerdio brings to the table, right? So CDI created this partnership with Nerdio. We've been very successful with it, and it's been very cost-effective for our customers as well. So we're going to start off by doing a product overview of Azure Virtual Desktop and just give you guys the base knowledge you need to be able to do the deployments. As well as what those deployment methods should be, right? So what type of desktop design we're utilizing, as well as what those cost-conscious selections should be. After that, we're going to have Nerdio come in. They're going to go ahead and discuss their product as an overview, give you some of the features and show you where those cost savings can occur. And then we're going to have a live demo for you guys. So my name is Gary Font. I'm the Senior Cloud Solutions Architect focused on Azure itself. So I work with CDI and customers to help you guys build out your cloud environments. We also have with us Jason.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Jason McHenry. I am one of the directors in CDI Solutions Architecture team. My group specifically deals with end user compute solutions. So, VDI, endpoint management, pretty much everything an end user would directly touch. I also actually have the privilege of sitting on CDI's office of the CTO, and so I look after kind of the go-to-market strategy for all things workspace. So,
all right, thank you, Jason. From the Nerdio side, we have Pete.
Hello, everybody. Pete Langus on the Nerdio Enterprise Sales team. I apologize for not being on camera. I had some technical challenges here, but good to virtually see everyone. I'll have with me today Greg Robertson. Greg is a director of sales engineering. He'll actually be showing you the Nerdio solution today. So we're excited to show you that a little bit later in the presentation.
All right, thank you, Pete. All right, so the first thing I want to cover with you guys is really some of the initial benefits you get with utilizing Azure Virtual Desktop as your VDI platform. So Azure Virtual Desktop has the ability to provide a bring your own device methodology for end users and have them connect and have a seamless experience no matter what device they're connecting to. And it has the ability to be able to push out a Windows 10 and Windows 11 desktop, as well as applications from virtually anywhere. So along with that, you're also going to get some built-in intelligent security that's built in not only to the operating system, but the overall platform. This, again, provides your employees and end users with the same experience no matter where they're accessing from or what they're utilizing. So a key example, this would be your Office products, right? Utilizing your inbox with Outlook, sharing files on OneDrive, and collaborating with people and teams. Same experience no matter where they're connecting from or how they're connecting in. AVD also provides you the ability to be able to scale out an entire virtual desktop environment fairly quickly. Now, granted, we're going to have Nerdio talk about their deployment method as well. So they've actually added on to this product and make it even more seamless, more effective, and more cost conscious than just a standardized AVD deployment. And you also have the ability here to reduce costs. So a lot of the costs when it comes to licensing, if you guys remember the old RDS options, you had to purchase user CALs, everything else. These licenses are actually going to be built in to your Office 365 platform. So if your current environment, your users are licensed for Microsoft 365 Business Premium or larger, right? So the E3s, E5s, they're already going to have the VDA license associated with their account. So that means they can have the ability to be able to access a desktop utilizing that same license. So one of the key differences between Azure Virtual Desktop and any other VDI platform is that there's no requirement for you to deploy out any of the brokering services or management services, right? They're already going to be built into the product because it's handled as a platform as a service. Now, you do still have control of some of the environment, and you can see on the left-hand side, where your control is, right? Versus what is managed by Microsoft. So you're still responsible for the desktop itself and any remote apps that you're publishing out. You still manage the desktops and the host servers. And then you are responsible, obviously, for management and policies around image updates, VM sizing, scaling, user identity access, stuff like that. Where Microsoft comes in is they're actually going to make sure they're providing that platform for you. So they're taking care of the connection services, all the brokering services, the licensing models, all of that is already going to be covered by Azure and managed by them. They're also managing the hardware in the back end. So just same as any other cloud provider, they're going to be managing any firmware updates, hardware updates to the actual hardware that's hosted. And that's typically done through a planned series of updates. So there's zero downtime for you guys when this stuff is happening. So if we look at this portion right here, this is really a slide that covers a lot more than just Azure Virtual Desktop. This is just a kind of a standard deployment of Azure in general. And the main reason I wanted to put this slide out here for you is if you look on the left-hand side, you see the client endpoints. We're not limited, right, to what type of endpoint. So it can be an Apple device, it can be a Samsung device, it can be a Windows device, right? All those devices have the ability to connect into a VDI environment utilizing AVT. And that's because they're using an RD client that is compatible between all those different operating systems. In general, when you're doing the deployment of Azure, even if it's the first time or if it's for extending or scaling out your existing environment, you really want to focus on the overall structure and governance of the product or the platform itself. And the way you can do that is by utilizing something like Azure Landing Zones or Azure Blueprints. So this is just kind of an example of how far you can go. It shows all these different multi-regions being deployed out. We can see there's deployments in the US, UK South, and Japan West, and how all those different regions can communicate back to a centralized VNet hub, which is where you're accessing these resources themselves. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason. Jason's going to cover some of the different types that are available, as well as those decision points we talked about earlier.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, so like Joe mentioned, from the kind of administrative side, AVD is a very lightweight platform. So when we get into best practices around design and cost control in an AVD deployment, 90% of the conversation revolves around what the actual desktop types look like. What are we going to publish to the users? How are we going to present things to them? So there's a little bit of demystification that we always have to do in going into these conversations because Microsoft, some of the other VDI vendors have kind of confused the space a little bit. So one thing that we always kind of level set on is in an AVD deployment, and some other types of VDI as well, but in an AVD deployment, there's a number of different types of pools that we can deploy to user communities. So we still have the old school RDS or RDSH terminal server, whatever you want to call it, farms where we can spin up a group of Windows servers, land multiple users on them, and present either desktops or applications from those. One of the cool ones that we do have in AVD specifically on the Azure platform is this notion of multi-session desktops. So we've got a Windows 10 machine that is capable of acting like a terminal server, handling multiple users, but under the covers, it's not Server OS, it's Windows 10. We've got the old tried and true single session VMs where we can have a kind of a one-to-one relationship between a Windows 10 VM and a user. We can do those in a dedicated flavor where we can basically make a Windows 10 or 11 desktop available to a specific user so that it can be persistent, and we can make changes to it that they show up again later. So that user owns that one specific desktop. And then with any of those, we can do what are they have a few different names, but virtual app, seamless app, published app. But basically the idea that instead of showing a user an entire desktop, we're going to show them one specific application. So the one kind of important concept there that gets lost a lot is we can really do those virtual apps from kind of any of those different pool flavors. But we'll get into that in a minute. So,
hey, Jason,
Jared,
real quick, how many users can connect to that second option, the multi-session Windows 10 desktop?
Man, so we're 14 minutes in. You're gonna make me say it depends. So, There's no hard and fast limit. Just like a terminal server, it
Okay.
is limited to what the machine can handle based on CPU. Excuse me, CPU, memory, GPU, basically the resource.
Okay. Okay. Gotcha.
Cool.
Thanks.
All right. So when we're selecting like what we're going to land on here, we've got a few different decision points that we put into our matrix. So the first and really the most impactful is going to be whether we need a persistent desktop or not. So the majority of customers land the majority of their users on a non-persistent desktop. Now we're still persisting things like roaming profiles and things like that. So desktop icons, settings within applications, things of that nature in those roaming profiles. So what we're talking about with persistence is really the ability to affect the operating system. Users that land on persistent desktops are typically power users that need to like install their own applications and things like that. Now, you can talk about pros and cons here. Non-persistent pools are preferred for two reasons primarily. One is that they give us better scalability. We're able to power them on and off and expand and contract the pools to meet the user load and kind of take advantage of Azure's elastic pricing. Persistent desktops typically need to be on, if not all the time, most of the time, so that they're ready and waiting for the user that's assigned to them. The other is management. Non-persistent desktops are usually managed by a kind of gold image, update, deploy that to the entire pool methodology. With a persistent desktop, you're managing them a lot more like a traditional desktop or laptop with an Intune or some other endpoint management platform. So, kind of things to consider there. Go ahead, Gary. All right. So the next point is what we were just talking about is kind of that allocation, single session versus multi-session. So in an on-prem environment, there was a lot more kind of behind this decision because this would affect our choice in operating system as well. Fortunately, Azure kind of takes it out of the equation, and it really is as simple as, okay, do we want multiple users on a desktop or do we want a single user on a desktop? And really, kind of the primary feature of that decision kind of comes down to impact domain, meaning, if I've got a user that that does something that drives up the CPU or sucks down a lot of memory, how big do I want that splash zone to be? Do I want to limit those users that are likely to do that to a single session? We also do occasionally still have applications that just don't play nice in a multi-user environment. They spray files to C:temp or something like that you can't have multiple users doing it at a time. But the important thing here is we can mix and match. We can, if we intelligently lay this out, we can use the multi-session pools for the majority of users and then handle trouble users rather with single session pools. All right, go ahead.
Yep. So real quick, just hope everybody caught that. You're not tied into one specific deployment method. You can use all of these methods inside of your tenant without any conflict.
All right. Next one, and I should have put this down towards the end because this is everybody's favorite topic. We do have to think about licensing. And to boil this down simply, this is a much easier conversation in Azure than it is on-prem because we do have those multi-session desktops available. We can do all of that under VDA. So we can do multi-session desktop, single session desktop, published applications from desktop, all of that coming from Windows 10 or 11. Would be covered by that VDA license that Gary mentioned most customers have as part of an ELA, Microsoft 365 subscription, existing entitlements because of desktop licensing. There's a whole bunch of different ways to get it. But all of those modes are kind of covered under that one license. If we do still have the RDSH CALs in play, then we can use those, but we go into that kind of that RDSH mode where we're doing those things from a published, from a server operating system. So really, what the licensing impacts here is what operating system we're going to run, whether we're able to run Windows 10 or 11, or whether we need to run on Windows Server 2019, 2022, something like that.
Right.
Actually, and what one important note that is is at the bottom there, all of these licenses do include FS Logic's entitlement, which is kind of that new profile engine that has pretty much become the de facto because, for a lot of reasons that we could dive into if anybody wants to. But both the VDA and the RDSH licensing carry that entitlement and give you that capability.
Right. And one additional note on licensing is if you do choose to utilize Intune management for your VDI environment, your license that you have current with Intune would transfer into that environment. You don't have to purchase new for these specific desktops.
Yeah. All right, and then kind of the last decision point that goes into the matrix is really, this is kind of a note that for platform. AVD, kind of the sister offering that goes along with that is something called Windows 365. It's a bit of a similar offering, except the primary difference is that, well, one, everything is a persistent desktop, but two, and the reason a lot of people are interested in it is AVD is consumption-based pricing. So basically the VMs that are on, you're paying for, just like any other Azure VM. We can use reserved instances and things like that to kind of control that. And Nerdio will talk about some of the cool stuff they can do to help with kind of cost optimizing that. But at the end of the day, it's all based on consumption. Windows 365 is a flat per user per month price, depending on the size of the VMs you give the users. So it's not quite as flexible, it's not quite as capable, but it is a lot more straightforward in terms of knowing at the end of the month what your price is going to be.
Right. The other thing to add on that, with the Windows 365 desktop, it's a base image, and applications are based on that Intune management profile.
Yep. All right. So there's obviously a lot of platforms available. And one of the things that we always do point out to customers is like, look, just because you're in Azure doesn't mean it has to be AVD. There are kind of some other options available. But having said that, we're seeing a lot of interest in AVD, and some of the things that are driving that are some of the cool things that Microsoft is doing. So before we turn it over to Nerdio, we just kind of want to give you a quick look at some of kind of the cooler stuff that's coming up that Microsoft's working on. These are in various states of available or preview, but Windows 365 boot is a feature that is I believe going to be in the next feature release for Windows 11 that basically allows a Windows 11 client to directly go into the Windows 365 the user's cloud PC when the machine boots up. So you're almost turning a Windows 11 machine into a thin client and using it as just direct access into a cloud PC. 365 switch is kind of a similar idea, but you can see it on the top screenshot there, right in the task switcher. We're adding in another virtual desktop for the cloud PC. So you can kind of toggle back and forth really slick and really easily between your your local desktop and your cloud desktop and kind of move back and forth. Windows 365 app. Honestly, this one's kind of catching up with some of the other players in the space, but basically this is the ability to take a 365 cloud PC or even some of the icons for applications within that and publish it directly to the taskbar or the start menu on a client machine. And then 365 offline is really the one that everybody's talking about right now. Once this rolls out, this is going to be the ability to basically check out a Windows 365 machine, effectively replicate it to a laptop, take it offline, work on it, and then have it check back in when the machine comes back online. So the idea is you're able to handle traveling users on an airplane or train or whatever, where connectivity is going to be more limited, but still have the ability to use a cloud PC. So some cool stuff that's coming up. Again, these are in various states of preview release and OEM release and all that kind of stuff. But things to keep an eye on and why Microsoft has kind of gotten so much traction around AVD. Go ahead, Gary.
Right.
I think this is Gary's favorite slide here. So one of the things that we always kind of tell people, we do a lot of comparisons for customers that are trying to decide, okay, what is my VDI platform going to be? And one of the things that we do kind of tell people is, look, we can go feature by feature through like a Citrix versus an AVD or something like that, kind of compare them. But the number one capability or feature that typically has people looking at Citrix or Horizon versus AVD is the fact that Citrix and Horizon have the ability to go kind of full hybrid mode, where we can run on-prem and in the cloud, and kind of leverage desktops out of both locations. Microsoft is fully aware of this, and in tech preview right now, they do have the ability for AVD desktops to be deployed to Azure Stack HCI, which is the on-prem deployment capability for Azure. That's not just limited to AVD. There's a whole lot of Azure resources that can run out of HCI. That's a whole topic unto itself, but it's just kind of worth calling out here that that's in tech preview. And that statement that, that hybrid capability that Citrix and VMware have that advantage is probably going to be shrinking a bit in the next few months here.
All right. Good. I said it better myself, Jason. All right. So now we're going to hand everything over to Pete. Pete's going to go ahead and go over the Nerdio product itself and how it ties into Azure and how it makes it more effective.
Thanks, Gary. Good afternoon again. Pete Langus with Nerdio, and Greg Robertson is here as well, our sales engineer. He'll be showing you a little bit of what we've built in a few minutes here. But quick history on Nerdio. We've been really focused on Azure for the last few years. The company actually has a pretty deep history in virtual desktops. So we're kind of laser focused on these days on the Microsoft suite of virtual desktops, namely AVD, Windows 365, and soon the Azure Stack offering. We've been working really closely with Microsoft since 2018. That's when we got a glimpse at what they were building with what was then called Windows Virtual Desktop, WVD. A couple years ago, they changed the name to AVD. So I'll just call it AVD for the rest of today's discussion. But we started working very closely with Microsoft, and we were pretty excited when we saw what they were building. If you look at AVD, it's really a signal that Microsoft has gotten very serious about the virtual desktop market. I think it took off much quicker than anyone expected, ourselves included, when the pandemic hit. The net of it for Nerdio was that we now have millions of users under management. So these are AVD users being managed by the Nerdio Manager for Enterprise solution. It represents over 10,000 customers since AVD went GA. And we're running at hundreds of new deployments every month. Some of these are very small, some of them are quite large. There's a lot in between, but we've built out a product suite to really help folks with the deployment and management and optimization of AVD. We kind of see, and we learned this when we started working with Microsoft, that while AVD was going to be pretty groundbreaking, and it's proved to be true, I think in terms of the economics that go with it, the ease of the solution, the way it's designed, those are pretty groundbreaking. But what we noticed right off the bat was that AVD is a little bit of a challenge to deploy. It's a little bit of a challenge to manage it effectively. And then as you start looking at a consumption-based model, folks are always very sensitive to what that's going to look like, particularly when they're coming off an on-prem system. So that's really what we've tried to design into the product to help alleviate some of those pain points. Gary, if you can hit the next slide, please. Let me dive into each of those a little bit. Really what we've built is a tool to extend the native AVD experience. So we're not trying to replace AVD. We actually complement everything Microsoft built. We sit on top of AVD, and we just really extend those native capabilities that exist. Same with Windows 365. One of the things I think that's really cool about Nerdio is that we built the solution so that if you're going to do a combination of different types of virtual desktops, so you may do some AVD, you may do Windows 365, you may get into Azure Stack HCI when that's released. Nerdio gives you the ability to create an estate that can have all these different types of virtual desktops and manage them from a single pane of glass. So that's been built into the product, and it's continuing to evolve as Microsoft has evolved their products as well. But when it comes down to it, what we really try to do is help with the deployment of AVD, help with the management, and then help with optimization. Let me dive into those a little bit. In terms of deployment, using Nerdio, folks can typically get up and running with desktop one, and this is assuming that everything's all set with the landing zone and everything's good in Azure. But if all that's a go, we can sometimes get people up and running in as little as 2 hours. So it's a very quick deployment engine. And this was, as you can imagine, especially useful in the early days of the pandemic when people were scrambling to get things deployed very quickly. They might not have had access to new hardware that they needed. They might not have had any kind of remote work solution. And so they settled on an AVD and found that it was really a bear to get deployed. We ran into people that it was taking, days or weeks to get going. And so with Nerdio, it was kind of the easy button to get them up and running, literally overnight sometimes. So if you're looking for a fast way to get deployed, or if you're looking to get some help along the way in conjunction with CDI, Nerdio's a good facilitator of getting up and running. So it's largely automated. It's built on best practices. And the automation continues if you're looking at maybe deploying some cloud PC desktops and doing some other things. So we've tried to make it easy to get to desktop one. Once you have that first desktop up and running, logically, you're going to want to expand to other users. And so that's where extending the management experience comes in. And this is where we've spent a lot of time and a lot of resources and taken a lot of feedback from both Microsoft and customers and our partners to learn what some of the pain points are and automate a lot of day-to-day type tasks. So things like creating an image, updating an image, assigning a different image to a different user or groups of users, harnessing different applications, testing applications. These are all things that we've built into Nerdio to take care of that day-to-day, very rote type tasks. The net on a lot of this is that you'll be able to throw a lower level resource in terms of management at these issues or these things that need to be done. My running joke is we've made it easy enough for a salesperson to do a lot of day-to-day tasks within AVD, which is fascinating and terrifying probably at the same time. But we've tried to give it that level of automation so that many tasks can be done quite simply. Our mantra is to try to be able to do anything in 3 clicks or less. So that's really the goal as we kind of build out that day-to-day management. The other thing we do, and we get a lot of interest in this, and it's a concern for anybody coming from an on-prem environment, starting to move into the cloud. They start looking at a consumption model, and they have two concerns with that. One is, what's the performance going to look like? And then what's it going to cost me? And when you go from a predictable cost to something that could be between 0 and a very large number, everyone seems to have their horror stories of moving into the cloud and specifically moving to AVD and having a big spend. And so what we've built is some really sophisticated auto scaling to make sure of 2 things. Number one, that the performance is acceptable for your end users. So they're going to have a desktop experience that's very similar to what they're used to. And instead of running everything 24/7 at full capacity to guarantee that performance, we'll make sure that if things aren't needed, if resources aren't needed, we will turn them down or turn them off. We can help you shrink the environment down. We can help you scale it back out when it's needed. But essentially, Nerdio's auto scaling will help right-size the environment, and our typical cost savings are 50% or more over an unoptimized environment. So we really give you that ability to let the environment scale as needed, but not overspend. So if you think about easy deployment, easy management, easy optimization of the AVD environment, that's really what Nerdio is all about.
Yeah,
Okay.
Dean, if I can add one thing real quick.
Absolutely.
But folks who are on the call, I've worked with Nerdio through this automation, the auto scaling, and their feature set is a lot more seamless and a lot easier to manage than the one that's built into Azure. So if you're already currently using some type of auto scale with AVD, I recommend at least giving this one a try and seeing how much more seamless and user-friendly it is.
Yeah, thank you for that, Gary. We appreciate that. I think one thing that I want to make sure I get across to everyone is that we're not doing anything that you couldn't do yourself in AVD. We are simply making it easier to turn the dials and press the buttons in the AVD environment, but we're giving you a dedicated GUI to do this. So you're not going to be transacting necessarily through the Azure portal. You still could. We're giving you this view into the world that lets you manage that AVD environment. And I'll give you one more example on the auto scaling. We have a New York City agency, and they typically have about 300 users that are running AVD. However, everyone in that environment, in their domain, has access to AVD if they wanted to use it, if they needed to use it. and that number is closer to 3,000 or 4,000 users. Most of the time, it's 300 users using AVD. However, a couple years ago, they had an event where their VPN went down. And so they swung all the remote users and off of the VPN because it was down over to AVD. Nerdio sensed that, let them scale it up. So they were able to scale the AVD environment for a couple of days up to a couple thousand users, handle that increased workload. And then when the VPN was repaired, they brought it back down. They didn't have to go out and invest in new hardware, new licensing, as a capital expense to do that. They simply just let the environment grow as needed, and then they shrunk it back down when the event was over. So it's a really good example of using the elasticity of the cloud, not having to overcommit on resources, and just getting a really good solution for a DR type event. All right, next slide. I'm going to hand things over to my colleague, Greg, and this is a pretty interesting example. We're going to walk you through kind of a typical AVD costs, where it comes from here, and then we'll show you how we apply what we do with auto scaling to save you some significant money.
Thanks, Pete. My name is Greg Robertson. I'll run through this with you today. So what we're looking at on the screen here is what we typically see from an Azure cost perspective for Azure Virtual Desktop. And we break that down into 5 different areas. Your most cost consuming, obviously, is going to be compute, around 70%. We have a number of items that will help save cost on that piece of it, as well as pieces to save cost on your FS Logix storage, networking, and a few other items within your AVD environment. Pete, did you have the next slide? Thank you. So we break that down into 6 different unique capabilities Nerdio has to help you save cost on your infrastructure. We break these down from the top 3 to the bottom 3. The first 3 are going to be primarily compute resources. And so if you look at the very top, you'll see unoptimized for this particular environment. This particular environment is configured for 192 users, set to heavy, 2 users per virtual CPU. And we're using the D8S V4 series virtual machine, along with a premium SSD. So for 192 users without Nerdio, we're looking at about just over $4,000 for your compute, with a total cost over on the right, you'll see, of $25.99 per user for 192 users without Nerdio. When Nerdio comes in, we take our first cost-saving measure of VM power management, and that will save you significantly around your cost. And with that capability, we're going to reduce the resources, or deallocate them, I should say, when they are not in use, and then turning them back on when they are requested. The next one is just-in-time provisioning. In this particular example, we have what we call a burstable capability of up to 50%. So in this configuration, we've defined our base level number of virtual machines, and as more resources are required, we can build that host pool from its current size an additional 50% as needed when the resources are required. Nice thing is, when we no longer need those burstable resources, we actually delete them from your environment so you don't have to pay for them overnight. And then the third option is taking advantage of reserved instances. We typically recommend customers, once they've deployed Nerdio and solidified their environment from a size and performance perspective, is to run our reserved instance analytics engine. That engine will provide you recommendations on how many reserved instances to purchase, saving you another 1% on top of the 57. I'm sorry, almost 20%. Sorry about that, missed the line, at 73. And then we get into OS storage management. This is where we can auto scale the OS disk, convert it from premium to standard HDD, reduce your costs, and as well as reduce the size of the image. So if you don't need the 128 that Azure typically defaults to, we can shrink that down as well. and then reducing your FS Logic storage. So this was a neat little feature that we had, and we still do it, although this particular feature has recently been added to FS Logics to do it internally, so you can do it one of two different ways. With that, I'll move over to share my screen and kind of work through a demo with you and go through that and explain that. If you have any questions, feel free to throw those in the chat, and we'll get those while I get this demo cranked up.
I can just, while Greg's doing that, I can just jump in really quick. You know, the example we showed is kind of it's an actual example. It's probably on the extreme side of savings, but we do have real data showing customers saving, you know, 55, 60, 70% over an unoptimized environment. So the auto scaling, it does work. It is real, real actual data, you know, has kind of proven that out.
Thank you, Pete. So I want to start off and kind of show you how Nerdio looks when it gets deployed into your environment. Here we have your Azure tenant with Active Directory in it, and Nerdio is going to deploy into your tenancy into one of your subscriptions, and we're going to deploy a service, app service, a Key Vault, Azure SQL, automation account, log analytics, and app insights. This piece right here are running on Azure PaaS services, runs you roughly $250 to $290 per month. From here, we'll utilize Graph API to connect into your users and deploy resources into your subscriptions. We do not have access to your private information. We only receive licensing utilization reporting. Through there, that license will get added to your Azure monthly bill as a third-party services. With that, this is Nerdio Manager for Enterprise. We'll work through a number of these items over here on the left and give you some insights into how we do what we do. We'll start off here under dashboards and take a look at your standard dashboard, a quick overview. If you're looking at the information that Nerdio gets, this is specifically the information Nerdio receives, just numerical values that you can also download your monthly usage, hourly host pool details, as well as your storage savings details. From here, we can go down to workspaces, and this is where Nerdio really starts to apply these capabilities that we have. Here is where you're going to add a workspace or ingest a workspace. So Nerdio has the ability to ingest a current environment completely non-disruptively as well. From here, we can add a workspace, provided a name, a friendly name, resource group, and the location that you want to put that in. I've already pre-created one, 0720GR1, and within that particular host pool or workspace, I've already added a host pool, but we could also add additional host pools to this workspace. Give that host pool a name. Determine the experience you want, whether it's a pooled multi-user or a single user personal or anything in between. We create profiles with your Active Directory configuration, so you can have multiple profiles, as well as FS Logics. Multiple profiles for FS Logics configuration. We can provide it a name with a prefix or a pattern. Pattern will add alphanumeric characters to the end, or you have the option to change that to hashtags for a numerical value. Your network, which is where the actual VMs will get deployed, irregardless of the location. If it's in a different region, that's fine. It's the network that we're going to look at, and that's where we're going to deploy. From an image perspective, and I'll get into this shortly as well, we do manage, have the ability to manage your images, and they will show up at the top of the drop-down list for desktop images, or you can select anything from the gallery or any other images at the very bottom that we are not managing, but we do see. We can select our VM size, anything that's available to us, our OS disks, including ephemeral disks, resource group, and quickly assign that. Once you click OK, that takes about 15 or 20 seconds, and that host pool is created, and we land on this page once the pool is created to set up auto scale. This is where we have a lot of our automation. You'll notice at the top right, auto scale is turned off by default. We can turn it on if we'd like and set the values. But what we'll do is we'll start off over here on the left where we've defined what this host pool looks like from a system perspective. And we have over here on the top right our estimated monthly cost for this particular configuration you'll see. One thing I want to point out is when everything is turned off, your storage cost for the OS disks on these 50 virtual machines will be $985 when everything's turned off. However, Nerdio has the ability to change that when we turn them off, and we can drop that from $1,000 down to close to $300 or $400. We also define where how many hosts we have in the base capacity, how many we actively want running 24/7 in the event that somebody after hours dials in, and this is our burst beyond capacity. So we can make this 25 virtual machines and change this to 25 as well. And this will allow us to build out 25 and expand up to 50 if we so chose and the resources were required. Next, we have our scaling logic. We do have the ability to do multiple triggers for scaling, auto scaling, which includes multiple triggers will include any combination of CPU, memory, or average active session. You can obviously do those individually as well, along with available sessions and user driven. From an available sessions perspective, I'll use this as an example. We'll put 12 users per virtual machine, and we will always maintain 12 sessions. That way, when the first person logs in the morning, that leaves us 11 sessions, not 12, and we start building out. When we have no more virtual machines to turn on, we start building the burstable. We also have the ability to set a schedule for auto scale to turn on and turn off, along with different levels of aggressiveness, whether you want to be super aggressive and shut down any VM that doesn't have an active session on it, or maybe you want to look at maybe medium and take a smoother approach where you're just looking for Nerdio to reduce resources when there's only disconnected or no sessions whatsoever. Some flexibility there, along with pre-staging a host, along with the ability to do multiple schedules. But if you wanted some of those virtual machines to be turned on, say by 8 a.m., we can give it the number of virtual machines we want on by that time, and then how long we would like Nerdio to hold off from shutting down virtual machines. This will give you up to 2 hours, as an example, for your users to come in and level set the environment from a login perspective before we start looking to reduce resources. Our standard messaging, and then the ability to correct broken hosts. We can look at different statuses from the RDP agent and act on those and address those virtual machines, all the way from restarting them to reinstalling the agent to deleting it and recreating it automatically. We additionally have some additional capabilities under our properties to add some additional value add around. As an example, if I show you one of our new capabilities, Azure Capacity Extender. In this particular host pool, we have a D8. If that version V5 is not available, we can alternatively select a different one to replace it if it's not available, or we can just have Nerdio automatically select the next available closest sized virtual machine. From there, we'll move down to endpoints. We'll skip over tenants mostly. Tenants will be WVD Classic, where workspaces will be AVD ARM through the portal perspective. So this is version 2, version 1 of AVD. We also have the yes, sir.
The important takeaway there is that this is what that means is that we can ingest any existing environment into Nerdio. This is not you need to start over and then redeploy in order to adopt all these features.
That is correct. Everything's built in, whether it's classic, spring update, or even if you want to migrate from Classic to Spring Update, we have that capability. We also have some interesting capabilities where we can clone this entire host pool with all the properties and deploy it as a different host pool. So you could have a dev pool, get it all set up. When you're happy with it and ready to go to production, just simply clone it, and it will redeploy those VMs with the same configuration into a new host pool. Next, we'll move down to endpoints, and we have two items under endpoints. All devices, which will be all Intune devices. Nerdio recently added Intune capability to add some functionality for, say, your level 1 or level 2 support organization, where they can come in and take a look at the device details. They can get policy information, whether or not it's compliant within Intune or not, what is failed. Basically, the ability for a junior level Intune admin to, if you so choose, either have only read-only access or specific access to either rename, change the user, retire, delete, update, or set your BitLocker key rotation. So all of these below the line can be individually controlled as to who has access to them. If you also happen to have Windows 365, Nerdio does have the ability to help manage 365 and AVD in the same pane. From here, you're able to deploy, restart, or resize that virtual machine. You can also deploy your own custom template if you'd like, but it gives you a nice single pane of glass to look at and manage not only your 365, but your AVD and endpoint devices as well. We're now at desktop images, and this is where Nerdio is going to add images and manage them for you throughout the process front to back. You can add an image either from an existing VM or from the library. When it gets here, this is a virtual machine. It'll be on or off. If it's turned on, you can simply log into the private IP address, make your customizations, log out, come back to Nerdio, and power off, set as image. From here, we can apply scripted actions to do additional customizations where you can write your own scripts or use Nerdio scripts, as well as the ability to deploy applications from WinGet onto those resources as well within the image. You're able to schedule it on a recurring basis. You can push this out to a compute gallery with a number of different options to automate that. Once this process is done, the thing to remember is this virtual machine is never sysprepped. We will clone it, work on the clone, create the image, delete the clone, and you're left with a source that you can still modify and an image derived directly from it. So the next time you have to update it, you just simply log in and make your changes. Next, we'll get to applications. And this is going to be our unified application management option called Unified Catalog, where you can set up multiple WinGet repositories, search across all those repositories, as well as save your favorites, along with creating your own personal private WinGet as well. So Nerdio can create your private WinGet. If you have a private WinGet, you can import your own personal applications and deploy them directly from your environment if you'd like. You can additionally add, check on the deployment status of all of your policies, as well as creating additional policies where you want to deploy an application to a particular individual or a host pool. You can do that directly through creating a policy for it. We do have several dozen Windows scripts and run books that are available to you, as well as the ability to create your own PowerShell scripts as well. We do support 3 different monitoring solutions: ControlUp, Insights, and Sapago. but we'll configure those for you. We'll configure and set up and manage your Azure Files infrastructure or Azure NetApp files, along with any custom RBAC roles within Nerdio that you want to select. We have 5 built in, including one for end user if they have a personal desktop. This way, that user can log in and manage their own virtual machine. And last but not least, our advisor modeler, which will allow you to effectively create a model of what it may cost you on a new host pool that you want to deploy. So you can model out a future host pool, put in your data points, and we will kick out a pricing structure of what we think it will look like from a Nerdio perspective. As an example, this particular one has cost of almost $2,000 without Nerdio and $728 with Nerdio, right around the 63% cost savings. That's generally a real world number that I see on a regular basis. With that, let's see if anybody has any questions.
I'm not seeing any pop up in the chat. Guys, feel free to unmute yourself if you just want to ask a question in general, since we have the availability.
Yeah, and so while we're waiting for that, I do want to go back to one point that Greg made early on. So the features, particularly some of the automation features that Nerdio is showing here, are not things that can't be done in vanilla AVD. And that's one of the kind of things that we've seen our customers kind of feedback to us over the years using AVD is things like auto scaling are features that are advertised as something AVD can do. You can take advantage of the cloud elasticity. What's not very evident until you actually get into it is how manual a lot of that is. Self-scripted, fighting with the kind of Azure auto scaling engines and things like that to make that stuff work. We're back on the view here where you can see all those options that are available to you specific for auto scaling. I actually worried that people may have missed kind of this feature as Greg was going through, because it's such a straightforward thing to configure that there's only a minute or two to talk about it. And this is hours and hours of work in native AVD versus a couple seconds to click in Nerdio. It is kind of pretty cool, the difference.
So Jason, let me show you an interesting quick configuration. You noticed on this particular image right here, we have a schedule, okay, to create the image on a recurring basis. But if we go to a host pool, you may ask, well, is it any easier to redeploy or re-image your entire host pool? Let's say you have 100 virtual machines. If you do that through the portal, that could take you hours upon hours. Within Nerdio, it is literally a handful of clicks. We select the host pool or the workspace, go to host, resize, reimage. We set a schedule, and we coordinate this schedule with the image creation process, select our image, and how many VMs you want to do at a time. That's it. Save and close, and it will forever run one day, on this example, after Patch Tuesday, every single month. As long as your image is updated by the time this runs, we will automatically pull the newest image and deploy it. This alone will save you hours upon hours.
Yeah, one of the other cool features that I always call out for customers, Greg, if you want to talk a little bit about kind of the dynamic disk type management, converting from hard drive to SSD kind of on the fly.
Absolutely. So, and a couple of things. So this is a feature that Nerdio specifically has. AVD has not integrated this capability into their environment, but we have. So when the virtual machine turns off, Nerdio is aware of it because Nerdio is shutting it down, and we convert that disk after we shut it off. So we shut it off, convert it. When the resources are required to be pulled back up, Nerdio gets that notification, Nerdio converts the disk, and then brings the system up. What you need to keep in mind, that disk conversion is instant. It's a quality of service checkbox within the Azure storage infrastructure that we're flipping back and forth to save you the money on that. The other thing is Jason had brought up within Azure Virtual Desktop portal proper, if you're not aware, they have but one metric to scale virtual machines on, and that's available sessions. It's the one I typically do for demos because it makes it easier to compare. But from that perspective, we step out of the box and we start adding these additional capabilities that Azure doesn't have, which is CPU, memory, and average active, along with user driven. The other auto scale I haven't shown you is on personal host pools. I have this personal host pool right here. Auto scale looks a little different for a personal host pool, primarily because it's one user per virtual machine. We can do auto scale on personal as well, scheduled based, user driven. We can define, if it's user driven, when to stop after the user is logged off, and whether or not you want to enable drain mode when that user logs off or not. A pre-stage schedule for when we would like to turn on virtual machines so we don't have to rely on start on VM on connect, although you could. And then two nice interesting features. Instead of spare sessions as being available for users, we have spare desktops that are sitting waiting to be assigned. And if you have an interest in shrinking that in the event that, say, it was a contractor or an employee that's no longer there, you can set auto shrink, define how long before it goes into pending deletion mode, send email notifications to multiple people if you'd like, log in or you're going to lose your information. So nice little features on personal as well, along with auto heal broken host, which will be effectively restarting the virtual machine or reinstalling the agent.
Right. And one key thing that sticks out with the auto scale, as Greg stated, was that they're not looking at just active sessions, right? You can look at utilize things like CPU and memory usage. So what that does is that prevents degradation for the end user's experience. If you utilize those resource types, it'll scale out before you even hit that session host limit, right, per user limit. So it's, again, an extended feature beyond what AVD currently offers. It definitely helps with the end user experience.
Gary, Jason, anybody jump in with any questions?
I haven't seen any come across. Don't be shy. It can be questions about the Nerdio product or general questions about Azure Virtual Desktop as well. I'll tell you what, while we're waiting for questions, I'm going to go ahead and share this last slide out from Nerdio. This is stuff that they have coming down the pipeline. So Pete, if you want to go ahead and speak to that one.
So these are some of the things we're working on. And Greg, feel free to jump in here. This has all been announced. But let me start by saying that one thing that we found at Nerdio is that we have the ability to rapidly innovate and iterate the product. And so we take a lot of feedback from customers. Our development cycle is very quick. We get new releases out typically every 4 to 6 weeks. We get a major release out twice a year typically. And everything that we build in is largely based on customer feedback, direction from Microsoft. Our partners have chimed in as well. And so we get a lot of really great ideas. And I was on a call the other day and a customer, we were going through something and he said, "Oh, there's that feature I asked for. That's really cool to see it." So things like that really kind of bring a smile to our face. And we really love getting that feedback and being able to innovate and improve the product. So these are some of the things we're working on. Unified application management. So the ability to really look at Windows apps, test them, install them, update them. This is, as things get more complicated, as AVD matures, it's all about applications and the user experience. So we're doing some good work there. The Nerdio Advisor, this is helping folks take a look at what AVD might look like on a cost basis. So in addition to helping folks deploy AVD, we'll give them a good snapshot on what it's going to look like from a cost standpoint and make recommendations. So, many companies are building AI into their products. This is one of our first forays into building some AI and to help customers as they go through that. And then we're starting to get more and more into endpoint management. So as we shift from just a virtual desktop and look at a more all-encompassing situation, more encompassing environment. We're building more and more of what you may do as a, let's call it an end-using compute organization. From an administrative standpoint, we're trying to build more and more of that into Nerdio. So these are kind of the three things we're working on, with that overall theme being the more that Nerdio can put on that single UE, we think the more value that we can build in, the more we can help our customers. And Greg, I don't know if you have anything else you want to chime in there.
All right. I'm going to take that as a no.
Actually, Gary, I do. I did get sent one question here. So, asking kind of if we're not paying for brokering, kind of how is pricing in AVD working, and what does Nerdio do to that? So, kind of to break that down a little bit. As I mentioned, Microsoft's trying to thrive with AVD, basically Azure consumption. So they don't charge anything for the AVD platform itself. The broker, the client, all that stuff is included for you. What they are charging you for is basically utilization for the VM. So think of the kind of the base AVD charges just like any other Azure environment. Compute, networking, storage, just like anything else. So we've got tools available to kind of model, what AVD consumption would look like based on specific user workloads and things like that, and we can get you an idea kind of like what that projected pricing would be per month. In terms of kind of how Nerdio plays into that. There is a per user per month price associated with Nerdio, and I'll let Greg talk to that in a moment. But the one thing that I will say is what we've seen across our deployments is that when the cost savings features that Greg has outlined are implemented, typically Nerdio more than offsets its cost that we're adding on to kind of the Azure run rate. So what it is saving you off of that run rate will typically be more than the cost of the license itself. So Greg, if you want to talk about your kind of subscription model, go for it.
Yeah, that is absolutely correct. I couldn't get off mute while ago fast enough, and and you guys moved on. But I do have one comment to make. That's an additional cost savings that I've seen on in our development environment, the Nerdio Advisor piece, and it'll be very, very interesting. It not only should be able to tell you if it's over provisioned or under provisioned, but it'll also tell you if there is a different virtual machine that's the exact same, maybe newer version that costs less money. So not only from a performance perspective, but from a cost perspective, the advisor will help our customers whittle down that cost as much as possible. From a cost perspective, Nerdio works off of a monthly active user model. If a user logs in for the month, then that user is assigned a license until the end of the month. If they do not log in, they do not get a license. So our license model is very much pay as you go. So it'll fluctuate a little bit every month as your users either log in or they don't. That cost, by the way, is also added, sent back and added to your Azure bill. So Nerdio is super easy to transact with, because that licensing cost gets added to your Azure bill, and it shows up as a third-party service on that bill for Nerdio.
Okay. We do have one other question that came in. Can we troubleshoot user connection issues, performance issues, and schedule agent upgrades? So I'm going to assume by agent upgrades, you mean that the RD Connect tool that's being used to connect to the to the AVD environment. Those upgrades are typically done through the Windows Marketplace. This is the same place that you get the app when you download it. As far as troubleshooting connection issues, there is a connection tool for diagnostics built into the RDS client tool. And then performance issues, if you're talking specifically end user performance issues, if they're noticing degradation, stuff like that, there are ways to review the existing AVD environment natively. Greg, I don't know if you have any anything to add around the Nerdio side?
A couple of things for you. So, from a monitoring perspective, there's a number of ways you can do it. All that data is locked into log analytics. So any of the monitoring agents, any one of these monitoring agents will help give you that information. We also, I don't have it on this particular one, but we do have support for Control Up, which will give you the most detail down to the last mile over Sapago or Insights. The other option that you have from a management perspective is if we look at your host pool, although this one is doesn't necessarily have anything in it, we have our auto scale historical charts. And from the historical charts, you'll see at the very top our first chart of auto scale. That one, oh, I don't have auto scale turned on that one. That's why. Let's take a look here. I'll just pull up one of these. So with auto scale, you can go in and look at the history, and from there you'll get a chart of virtual machines turning on and off with users logging in and on and off, number of user sessions, and the ability to look at your CPU and memory, along with the average session to get a better idea of whether or not it's over or underutilized. We also have that very same reserved instance analytics that I was talking about earlier, where if we see the need, we will recommend purchasing those.
Okay. All right. I want to thank everyone for your time. We're going to wrap up a couple minutes early here, give you some time back in your day. Feel free to reach out to us for any additional questions. Reach out to your account rep as well if you'd like to schedule continued discussions around both these products. All right. Thank you for your time.